Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today we're most pleased to discuss a topic that's been very popular on this program over the years, and that has to do with wildlife photography. We could not have a more appropriate person to be on our program today than one of our own colleagues at North Idaho College, Tim Christie, who is recognized throughout this country as very professional. His work is shown in the leading wildlife magazines around the United States. Our guest, as I indicated, is Tim Christie, who chairs the Division of Communications at North Idaho College. He teaches in the field of speech. He holds a baccalaureate degree from Eastern Montana College in Billings in the field of education. He also holds a master's degree from the University of Montana in communications theory. Tim has been at North Idaho College since 1972 and has had a number of positions, including those that I have just recognized. Tim, as a friend and a colleague, we're delighted to have you on our program, and this is a very exciting topic to discuss. Our viewers are always interested in this kind of professional work.
Thank you, Tony. Janelle.
Very pleased, as always, to have regular panelist Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in Idaho, and I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
Well, Tim, as we were talking before the show, you were saying that this has really been more than just a hobby to you. It is something that you do a lot of. Can you tell us how long have you been at this, and how did you get started?
Well, it started in about 1975, and our son at that time was about 5 years old, and we were tired of taking photographs of him with a little Instamatic, and we wanted to have a little bit better record of what he looked like and some of the things that he did as a child, and so I bought a used 35mm camera. And ever since a young child myself, I have always hunted and fished and have been real active in the outdoors, and so it just became kind of a natural extension to whenever I was in the outdoors, I always carried my new camera with me. And one thing led to another, and I was on a vacation one time in the late 1970s, and my wife and son and I were in the Canadian Rockies, and as happenstance would have it, we ran into a herd of bighorn sheep, and I spent the day photographing bighorn sheep and had a lot of fun, and actually took a couple of fairly decent photographs, and one thing led to another, and I ultimately became a wildlife photographer.
And so once you start, now you take the pictures, but you have to do more than that. Then you have to be able to identify the ones that are worthwhile, I take it. And how do you do that? How do you decide which ones are good?
Photography is a personal process. A lot of it is based upon what I like, and of course I take photographs of what I like. And so from that particular standpoint, a lot of what I keep are the things that I like. I, however, have learned over the course of the last number of years what editors like as well. And so I think what I like and what I look for are what editors look for. You look for things like composition. What is good composition? You look for things like lighting, dramatic lighting. You look for good color. You also look for, and this is somewhat elusive in trying to describe it, but you look for a sense of naturalness. And I think that's one of the things that I try to achieve as much as anything else, is that I try to take photographs that capture, in a one-dimensional sense, the essence of the life of that particular animal. And that is a challenge in and of itself. Other things that I have to do in this particular process besides just taking the photographs is you have to edit the photographs. Then after editing them, you have to file them, and I have a computer system that I use for filing and labeling and those kinds of things. And so the actual process of photographing is a very small part of being a wildlife photographer. I would say that probably less than 10% of the time is actually being out in the field doing the things that I got into this to begin to do with. So.
Do you remember the first time you sent a photograph to an editor? Was it pretty scary?
It was very scary, and that's one of the reasons that lots of people are not successful in this, because in essence what you're doing is you're saying, I'm putting myself into the public arena. It is like the athlete who goes out and performs in front of a group of people. What you're doing is you're putting yourself up for public ridicule, lack of a better word,
or public adulation,
or adulation. And there is a sense of sending it into the editor, and the editor looks at it and says, "This is wonderful," or the editor sending it back and saying, "This is absolutely awful." And you take a risk. And I can remember the very first time that I ever sent photographs in was in the early 1980s. It was in the winter of 1981. And I sent it to a National Rifle Association publication called American Hunter. And in mid-February, my wife got a call at home, and they said, "Can I talk to Tim Christie?" And of course, I was at work, and she said, "Sure." And so they called me, and they had selected one of my photographs for a cover. So the very first time that I had ever sent photographs in, I was lucky. I was very lucky. But part of that process that I've learned was that there's a lot of rejection involved as well. I today, even though I consider myself to be a pretty successful photographer, I could wallpaper my entire house with rejection notices. But you just have to take it as being an attitude. You have to have an attitude that says they can't use it now, they may use it a year from now, they may use it 2 years from now, or if they can't use it, somebody else can use it. And if it's good, that's true. Part of the process is learning what they look for, and if you have material that is good enough for them to use, then you can sell it. It's just a matter of being able to being perseverant enough to do it.
Tim, I'd like to follow up on that because I know you're very modest, but it's very important for us on the program to let our viewers know the success you've had. Would you list some of the magazines that your works have appeared in? And I know I've seen a number of them that it's really an honor to be on the front cover because that's what the customer sees when they're buying the magazine.
Mm-hmm. I've been on a number of magazines. Probably the magazines that I'm the proudest of is I've been on the cover of National Wildlife magazine twice. On the front cover. I've been on the back cover a couple of times in addition to that. I've been on the cover of Wilderness magazine, which is a wilderness society. I've had the cover of a Sports Afield magazine, which is in the sporting industry, is a very prestigious magazine. And then I've had a number of covers on magazines like American Hunter and Peterson's Hunting and Bow Hunting and places like that. Other places that I've published work have included places like Audubon calendars and Silver Creek calendars, and I have, although you don't get credit lines for them, another place that I'm particularly proud of are my industrial clients, people like L.L. Bean and Browning and Redfield Optics, and I just sold a photograph that's going to be in a nationwide ad for Ranger boats, and they're celebrating and applauding the efforts of the U.S. servicemen, and they're using one of my bald eagle photographs that I took last spring. And so my publishing, or the work that I've had published, has spanned a variety of different kinds of mediums.
I've also seen that, and later on the program the viewers will be happy to know we're going to show some of your work, but I've also seen some of your work in frames and some of it's at your office and other places. Also, do you sell some of your work to individuals who have a love for wildlife photography?
Mm-hmm. I used to do a lot of that. Initially, that's kind of how I got started, was selling in the form of prints, and we used to do some art shows and things like that. We don't do much of that anymore because, to be real honest with you, it's very expensive because you have to make prints and you have to do the framing and the matting and the glassing and all those sorts of things. And in all candor, it is from a cost-benefit standpoint, it is less expensive for me to just take the photographs, send them to ad agencies or magazines. They do all the printing and all that other sort of work, and they pay me a lot more money than in terms of print sales. But I do sell prints, and I have a number of private collectors who have my work, as well as a number of businesses in the area that have my work on display. I
know that some of your work that goes with some of these national magazines and so forth, that you really, for some of the photos, you've gotten thousands of dollars for those.
Yeah. It depends upon the particular client. It depends upon how much they use, where it's used, and how it's used. The cover of a magazine will always pay more than the inside of the photograph, simply because that's what's attracting the customers. Literally, people buy magazines based upon the cover, and there are some magazines who contend that as much as 1/4 of their sales is dependent upon the cover photograph. So that cover photograph is a very special photograph to those people, and when they buy it or when they select it, they do it in the mind that it is a marketing tool.
Recently, the Spokesman Review did an article about you and your work, and I was just really impressed with that article. And I want to ask a couple of questions. I thought you just were so articulate in sharing with people the real essence of doing this work. I know that there's some financial rewards and all, but I know that you do it for other reasons. Would you share with us what you've learned about life from your wildlife photography? Seeing, your comments were that seeing life in its very natural state has taught you something about life. I'd just like to give the opportunity to express that to our viewers.
Well, I think the thing that photography has taught me is that life is a process, and it is much more than just the day-to-day kinds of things. We have to understand as life as being something that begins and something that ends, and that I think as a discredit to the understanding of life, too many times we've seen things that have been published, either published and or put in film, that are very misleading. And I think the one thing that photography has taught me is a true appreciation for what life is and what it isn't, and that life is very difficult, and that there is a beginning to life and that there is an end to life, and that there is nothing. I don't know, we oftentimes look at things as being incredibly cruel or incredibly evil or incredibly kind. And for example, lots of my work people react and they go, "Oh, that's so cute." And I react in the same way. But I guess, and I've experienced, my son and I experienced a personal tragedy that we lost my wife in November. She died of a heart attack. And I think my understanding through photography has given me some sense of appreciation about what life is, and that although we are saddened by that particular process, I know that there is a beginning and an end to life. And it's like I mentioned to the reporter at the Spokesman Review, I've had the pleasure to watch life begin, and that is truly, to me, one of the most special times that I've ever had the opportunity to photograph, is to photograph an animal being born. And at the same time, I've photographed animals dying, and that is a very harsh thing to be able to photograph, but yet I've been able to see the full spectrum. I've seen birth through death and recognize that life is a day-to-day process, it's a moment-to-moment process, and I guess from my sense that I've learned to appreciate that.
I just think so many times that individuals don't articulate like you have, that in dealing with something like this work, that you've learned about life in a way that those who do not participate in those kind of things don't have the experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think good photographers capture that, and I think that's the difference between a picture and a photograph. I make a distinction between a picture and a photograph. I think a photograph captures something. Now, what it captures, I don't know. And it captures different things to different people, and different people react in different ways to it. But it has an emotional reaction to it. It creates an emotional reaction. For example, I can remember some of the great Pulitzer Prize-winning photographs. One of the ones that comes to mind is the person who was assassinating a prisoner of war, and I can't remember. I think it was Vietnam or Cambodia. That, to me, is an incredible photograph. It is not a picture. It is an incredible photograph because it elicits that same kind of response. Wildlife photography does the same thing to me. Good wildlife photography is something like I can sense a grizzly bear. I can sense the presence and the absolute magic that a grizzly bear brings to the environment in which he or she lives in. At the same time, I've seen photographs of grizzly bears that don't do anything to me, and that's a picture of a grizzly bear, and it's nothing more than just an illustration. It's a form. But the photograph that just goes, and you walk away going, wow, that's something that is incredible to me, and that's what I try to capture.
Thank you. Janelle Berg.
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit more and talk about your relationship with some of your subjects, some of the animals. Do you have a favorite animal? And can you think of a couple of examples for us of maybe favorite photographs where you felt real kinship with the animal?
I have every animal that allows me to photograph them is a favorite animal. I have two animals in particular that I have a passion for. And one of them is elk. I love elk. I have loved elk since I was a little tiny kid, and I just absolutely love elk. To me, the essence of living in the Northwest is spending a day in a meadow in the fall and listening to a big bull elk bugle and gather his harem and chase cows, and the cows squealing and the calves jumping around in a meadow. That to me is just absolute magic, and I have a passion for elk. The other thing that I really love is grizzly bears. And I have had a couple of real serious encounters with grizzly bears. I was put up a tree. I surprised a sow grizzly bear with a couple of cubs one time in Glacier Park, and it could have cost me my life. And I have absolutely no animosity to that particular bear, but because it was a mistake that I made. I have spent a lot of time in the Canadian Rockies, and I've spent a lot of time in Alaska. Photographing grizzly bears, and there is nothing to me that is quite as special as being in grizzly country, because to me, even if you never see a grizzly bear, you know that you're in a special kind of country, because if you don't know that, you're in trouble. And so there's that magic, and the challenge is to photograph that bear to depict that magic. And it's a very difficult challenge. Bears are very difficult to photograph because they have very small eyes. And the magic of a photograph oftentimes is to be able to see the eyes. And if it's like any portrait. If you look at a portrait of a human being, what you look at is you look at the eyes. And that's oftentimes the case with a bear or any other animal. And so it's difficult to capture that personality. And bears have such wonderful personalities, from, being incredibly ferocious to being whimsical and wonderful parents and those kinds of things, and so I suspect if I have a choice, that's what I'd like to photograph.
Tim, one of the things we're going to do now is that our viewers would not appreciate the fact if we talked about all this and then didn't show any of your work. And you brought two pieces of your work, and I'm going to bring those up to the camera, and we'll let you describe these for us and where you took them and why you chose these particular ones that are meaningful to you for today's program.
Okay, this is a young fox kit, and it was taken near Great Falls, Montana. And I have a very good friend of mine who's a photographer in Great Falls, Montana, and he had located this den of fox, and we went out one evening. And this was a particularly special time for me because I had never photographed any fox prior to this particular time. And there was this den of 4 little pups, and they were probably about 2 months old, somewhere in that neighborhood, and they were just getting ready to leave the den. And that night, the female, we never did see the female, but the pups were so curious that they would come out, and one of them would come up and he'd smell my toes on my feet, on my boots, and he kept walking up, and then I'd move my camera and he'd run back to the den and what have you. Well, this particular one went over by these black-eyed Susans, and he started smelling the flowers just as if he was a little child in a field of flowers, and he'd go to each flower and smell each flower as if it had somewhat of a unique odor to it. So there's a certain sense of magic in that particular evening, and that's one of the things about photography is that when you're photographing, you can tell when you've got something really good. You just have there is a sense that says, this is great stuff. And I knew when I was shooting this that this was great stuff. This second photograph is a photograph of a bird that is found virtually throughout the entire Northwest. It's a ruffed grouse, but it's a bird that's very secretive. It is hunted in the fall, and I hunt them in the fall, and they're wonderful to eat. I really enjoy grouse as a meal. But in the spring of the year, this is the mating display. And oftentimes people will hear these, but they will never see them, and they will never ever know what they look like. And what they're doing is the male grouse gets up on a hollow log, and he stands up there and then will fan his tail out, and then will cup his wings and beat his wings very rapidly together. And it sounds, the best sound is the sound, or the best description is the sound of a tractor starting, or somebody trying to start a chainsaw. And it's a beat that increases in volume, and then it reaches a crescendo, and then it falls off. And this little ruffed grouse will stand there and do this for hours on end. I had for several years had tried to photograph ruffed grouse, and I had blinds set up and everything else like that up throughout northern Idaho, and I had never been able to get one single photograph, and I suspect that I had spent 40 or 45 hours trying to photograph ruffed grouse. And this friend of mine from Montana called me up this one day and he said, I spent the day photographing this ruffed grouse. And I said, you spent a day? And he said, yeah, this ruffed grouse is just the dumbest grouse I've ever seen in my life. And so the next weekend I drove all the way over to central Montana, and this ruffed grouse was still on the same log, still drumming away. And so I went over there and I ended up shooting about 20 rolls of film on him. And that's the only opportunity I've ever had to shoot ruffed grouse. And so, especially when they've been drumming like that. So it's kind of goes back to the idea that you shoot what you can when you can, and then because you never know when you're going to be able to shoot it again.
It's an illustration that with some wildlife it's a lot more difficult than it is others, and you have to spend a lot more time.
Oh yeah. There are some wildlife species that I have literally spent hundreds of hours trying to photograph, and to this day have very marginal work on representing. And yet, on the other hand, I know some people who have just stumbled out into the woods one day, and here's this animal or whatever the case is, and they're very, very cooperative. So, it's photography is a situation of opportunity. Mm-hmm.
And because you're a very busy person, as I indicated in my introduction, with your teaching and your administrative work at North College, you don't have as many hours maybe as some photographers, so you have to, I would think you have to really budget your time to...
Yeah, I budget my time. Most weekends that I can, I photograph. That's where I try to spend my time. I spend a lot of time photographing on weekends, and I will travel many, many weekends to be able to photograph. Almost every day I spend 4 to 5 hours a day working on photography in one form or another. I'm either filing slides or sending out submissions or something like that. So I'll finish a day of work here in NIC, and then I'll go home in an evening and work for 3-4 hours, depending upon what the pressure is. And there are some times of the year when there's a lot of pressure, and so lots of times I'll spend all weekend working on submitting slides and things like that. But
Janelle Berg.
Well, the next question I have is a practical one for use with people who like to just shoot their family, say, for example, as in addition to maybe doing a special subject. How many pictures do you have to take in order to get that one photograph as you're talking about? Can we expect to get that on the first time? Should we just wait and kind of try to catch that moment? Or do you need to take a whole bunch of pictures one after another, and then you'll finally get those that capture the special moment?
Yeah. If you're really good, you only need one. I'm not nearly that good. I guess my sense is that I would shoot photographs until the point that you feel comfortable with what you think you have. Because a photographer, if you know how to do the mechanics of the camera, and you can focus and you know how to get the correct lighting and everything else like that, the rest of it is composition and trying to put things together in the ways that you want them together. And that for the person who is taking family portraits and things like that, they should have an idea of what they are looking for. It's like when I go out and photograph wildlife, I have an idea as to what I'm looking for. I know what the editor looks for. And so when I try and photograph that particular animal, I photograph it within those constraints. Now, once I think I've gotten that, then what I do is I start playing around and doing different things to see what I can come up with, and to come up with something different and new. I think the one mistake that many people make is that film becomes the overriding consideration as to how many photographs they take. And that I don't know how many people who have said, well, I went to Yellowstone Park and I shot 2 rolls of film. When I go to Yellowstone Park, I usually shoot 60 or 80 rolls of film in a weekend if I have good shooting. And I don't think anything about doing that. Now, I'm not saying people should do that as well, because I have a different purpose, and I mean, I pay for it through my work. But at the same time, I think it's a real sin to go on a week-long vacation and shoot a roll of film and then expect to be able to capture the essence of what that vacation was all about, or the essence of that particular experience.
What about weather? Should one wait for the perfect sunny day, or should you just take pictures anytime?
I think I think you should be able to photograph at any time, and good photographers learn how to photograph in all kinds of conditions, because the reality is that you are plagued by bad weather more than you are blessed with good weather. And if you wait for just those sunny days, you are going to spend a lot of time reading a lot of books. And my sense is that you... And the other thing is that I think some of the very best photographs that I've ever seen taken have been taken on overcast days or on rainy days. One of the most precious photographs that I took of my son, that I have ever taken of my son, was when he was about 4 years old, and it was a very overcast day in Glacier National Park, and he is down in some flowers, smelling some flowers, and it's a wonderful photograph. But if I'd waited for a sunny day, we would have never had that. So from that standpoint, I think you have to do it in any kind of condition. Within I mean, obviously not so your camera's getting wet or anything else like that.
Tim, we're just about time, but I hear you saying too that you have to capture the moment, and you can't, in wildlife photography, and like your son too, there's moments that come along that if you don't capture that, then you won't get it. You won't get that same message.
Yeah, I think that's true. And some people say, gee, you're lucky. And there is a certain amount of luck involved in what I do. But the reality, as far as I'm concerned, is that you are given opportunities. And it's like life.
So sorry to interrupt. We have to stop on that note. Thank you, Tim, so much for being here. It was a wonderful program. And thank you, Janelle. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you've enjoyed our program, and I invite you to be with us again next week at this same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.